Hello, hello. As you can see, we've got the headphones on. It's live review time. We're going to be listening to this new Fiona Apple album, um, Fetch the Bolt Cutters, which came out quite recently. Let me be totally real and honest with you. The reason I'm going out of my way to record my initial impressions and thoughts about this album are 99% because of the score Pitchfork gave it. Pitchfork has been around for decades now, and I've been reading it for about 15 years, I think. And one of the things that has always made it so compelling, that's made it so exciting to read each day, is because of how judicious they are with scores. The last score over 9.4 was 5 years ago, D'Angelo's Black Messiah. Before that, it was Kanye West's Yeezus, which got like a 9.6 or 9.7. And before that, Kanye again had the most recent 10 with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So scores above like 9.2, 9.3 are very, very rare indeed. Last night around 1 a.m., very soon after Pitchfork puts out their new reviews for the day, a friend of mine messaged me and said, "Did you see Pitchfork though?" And I knew this Fiona Apple album was coming out. I knew that Pitchfork is a huge fan of Fiona Apple. I believe her previous album, which was like 8 years ago, The Idler Wheel, was like top 5 of the decade. We can check that quick, actually. That's not what we want. We want lists and guides. 2010's albums. I believe it was in the top 5, her previous album. So I thought, what could this score be? Yeah, it was number 5. What could this score be such that my friend is messaging me? And ladies and gentlemen, we have a 10. For the first time in 10 years, Pitchfork has awarded a 10. This is the most powerful move they can make in order to recommend an album to you. And so I'm going to go along with it. I'm going to accept this recommendation and take it seriously and go into this album with my full attention and focus and really try to get as much out of it as I can. I haven't really listened to much of her other music. This is just a classic review. This album actually came out a long time ago, 1999. This they only gave a 9, but I guess it grew on them. Yeah, I don't really know her music very well at all. This is another classic review, I see. So I don't know what to expect from this. My hope is that it's going to be like Joanna Newsom, a musician whom I love. They both make like art pop, kind of. Maybe Fiona Apple's is also sort of Baroque-y, would be nice. The album cover gives no clues. The title is disorienting as well. I haven't actually read this review yet. I just saw the 10. So let's go in. I'm going to start it now. If you want to listen along at home, I'll give you a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's panned really hard to the left, and it's making me worried that my audio is screwing up. But I don't think so. I think it's just artistically panned to the left. It sure isn't getting panned online. This is already really cool. Sure. Ooh, ooh. Ooh. Something about that melody. Do, 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 do. Holy. Okay. For a second, I was paranoid it was playing out of my speakers as well. But yeah, okay. Ding, 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 ding. Ooh. Whoa. Okay, I'm impressed. I'm impressed. Oof. Ooh. Man. I guess I'll make some notes maybe. Ooh, the title track. Huh. The dogs! More dog, more dog. Doggy. Nice. I'm begging disagrees with me. Ooh. Whoa! Ooh. Because the Ferris wheel goes around and around. Just to throw my anger out the door. I can't do other work. Bum 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 dun 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 bum 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 bum. Oh, that's so good. Bum 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 bum. Dun 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 dun. I like feeling out like an echo of a rhythm sometimes. Like if that had continued. Dun 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 dun. You know, where would it show up? And then you can notice there's actually still kind of things retaining that pulse. Dun 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 dun. Wow. Wow, wow. Ooh, 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 ooh. Cool. It's such a cool melody. Ooh, ooh. Oh God. Holy shit, I love this. What? Oh my god. Wow. That's a big snare. Parallax. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ooh, the slowdown. Huh. Nice. Oh. Climb like peaches and creams. Time along, burning at the seams. And try it like strawberries. I climb like peas and beans. Burning at the seams. Strawberries. I climb like peas and beans. And beans. Oh, that was cool. The drum roll. I like sun, cream, What is going on here? Oh. Wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, you should know what you don't know. Holy. Oh, God. Oh, my God. All right, the final track. I only move to move. Oh, I only move to move. Ooh, the way that moved out of sync. What? Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Okay. 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 That's it. Wow. Okay. I'm really impressed. I love that. I really love that. Wow. I have a lot to say. You could hear me typing probably throughout. Um, here are the notes that I took that I wanted to discuss in further. Um, some of the melodies in the opening track trigger something very, very deep in melodies. What? What am I talking about? Well, I know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of melodies on this album where it like scoops up, like it'll kind of like wander up, and then it's like the space that it creates in moving upwards, it then quickly will like recapsulate in this like cool scooping effect on the same melodic notes that it did in like the larger progression. It's amazing. I never realized how much I like that sort of melody, but now that it's like so clearly hitting me here, I feel like I saw that a lot. Um, I want to talk about kind of two different things, I guess. One is what I thought of it. I loved it. But then I'm also curious about discussing the history this album has made in being the first 10 in 10 years. Why did Pitchfork give this a 10 versus all of the other music that they clearly love to some extent? Why is this a 10 and not like another 9.3 or whatever? I think there's a pretty interesting conversation to be had there too. Anyways, let's go through my notes first and then see if we can kind of bring up these kind of greater opinions from it. This I thought was really interesting, that it feels like she's very much playing within a musical tradition, everything has the sense that it's a studio session recording with multiple musicians hanging out together, playing their instruments, playing songs, perhaps improvising on those songs, perhaps kind of segueing into jams. A lot of the structural components and a lot of the kind of songwriting elements are built up from that feeling of just like, we're all gonna get together and play. It's not like constructed. It's not like built up from the top down using technology, using mastering, using studio magic of all types. It feels like things were written to be played, and that the experimentalness of it, the abrasive elements, the noisy elements, the dissonant elements, all of these things that kind of seem weird were more from her emotional fury, from the depths of her need for emotional expression, from that space, from the mode of playing as a musician with other musicians. They unleash this from within her. Not that she's starting with, I'm gonna make something like weird. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's like all of that abrasiveness and stuff is just how she's feeling. It's so good though, as someone who likes noisy, abrasive music, the fact that she's able to kind of arrive the long way around at these sorts of things that I have kind of like musical fetishes for lack of a better word, that I seek out in really kind of weird outsider experimental music, that she's just getting to from pure musicality. Like it's kind of mind blowing to me. The way she talks about her memories, I thought was really brave and powerful. That she plunges right in with like stories and anecdotes and scraps of memory that typically are like deeply embedded in like trauma and are the very much the roots of what you can actually see in a person. She just unabashedly is tearing these roots out of the ground and showing us slices of them. The rawness of her memory, I think, is just so amazing, and just the hugeness of perspective that emerges sometimes. On the opening track, she just kind of casually starts talking about, and when I die, I know the particles of me will scatter and disperse, and I'll return to the pulse. And she says it so naturally, just like that this is just where her mind is. Like it's not something she has to confront and overcome, but she's just so free of expression right now that she can conquer even that. Like she can weave that into the poetic nature as well. In the second track as well, she's talking about the person who saw potential in her, Shamika, and she just casually mentions, now Shamika is gone, she's dead, I'll never see her again. And it's like she's ready for that too. She's not being defeated by anything she encounters in this inward journey. But yeah, like no matter how crazy it gets, it's always within this like rollicking good time. Like very, very, very rarely on this album do we lose the sensation that this could be played in like a bar and have everyone in the audience cheering and clapping along and singing. That it's encountering all of that within this territory in which she's so confident and so expert. There's like a lot of found instrument stuff, a lot of like, just making noise with what you have around, which I really love. I love that kind of thing in general. But again, it's like I'm seeking out weirdo artists that like start from that place and slowly build up to musicality through experimentation and through field recordings and found sound and stuff. Whereas this is going in the opposite direction. And the only thing I can think of is Beach Boys. The Beach Boys, when they were working on Smile, the album that eventually kind of got dissolved and broken up into a million other projects, and the sessions that they recorded have only emerged relatively recently in like 2012 or something. There's songs where they start experimenting with this like music concrete. They start experimenting with sawing sounds, workshop sounds on the track that I think is called Workshops. But this kind of reminds me of that like her emotions are at their limits, that she's feeling confined by traditional instruments, and now she just starts hitting everything around. Same with the dogs showing up. I wish there was even more dogs. This is like one of the few things I knew about this album going in, is that she credited some dogs on it that are actually like in the liner notes and credited. And I saw a post on Mew. I went on Mew immediately after I found out this review came out, the 4chan music board, because I knew they'd be losing their shit, and they were losing their shit. Less than I actually anticipated, but still quite a lot of shit losing. I counted, and 1/3 of all the threads on the board were about this getting a 10. I would assume it's even higher now that more people are awake. Anyways, I knew there was going to be dogs. Again, another Beach Boys overlap, but a feeling of like clawing at the edges of musicality and opening up into this gigantic world of noise and allowing your emotions to flow through that new space in expression. It's wonderful. This idea of claustrophobic harmony, it shows up a few times, not just on the title track. What I mean by that is they'll have a second vocal line harmonizing, but it'll be panned such that it feels like they're kind of claustrophobing. They're just claustrophobic. They're coming in from around you, and it can be quite intense, especially when it's like a not very widely separated harmony. That's something I really love in general. It reminded me of Tom Waits. A lot of stuff on this album reminds me of Tom Waits in the best possible way. I guess they kind of came up around the same time. Sort of. No, Fiona Apple is later, but I feel like they kind of come from the same school of thought. This kind of art pop, experimental pop, really kind of playing with conventions while still operating in an area of expectation of structure and form and stuff. I have other stuff to say about the harmonies, but we can get to that. There's a conversational style to her lyrics on a lot of these tracks that I actually found pretty funny. And it's disarming, you know? It makes you put your guard down and feel like you're just kind of conversing with her, such that when she starts getting into heavier topics, when she starts, you know, really expressing herself quite furiously or quite distressed, and you feel that come out, it's not like you're anticipating it. You're anticipating more just levity and banter, and then you get hit with the realness. It's really good. But you know, it's not just good insofar as that it sets up that juxtaposition, that it sets up that attack. It's just good on its own too. It's genuinely funny and a nice feeling of conversation. She was talking about, I grew up in the shoes I was born to wear, or something, the shoes I was born to fill. And then she talks about, I need to run up that hill. So is this talking about Kate Bush? Because Kate Bush, one of her most famous songs, of course, is A Deal with God. Wait, what's it actually called? It's called Running Up That Hill, I think. And if I only could, I'd make a deal with God, and I'd tell him to swap our places. Been running up that road, been running up that hill with no what is it? With no something. And if I only could. Oh, it's such a good song. So is that her like paying a little homage to Kate Bush, that when she started her career, people saw her as the next Kate Bush, and another legend of art pop, another woman that made extremely critically acclaimed art pop. Maybe? I don't know. Her music very, very dissimilar to Kate Bush, though. Kate Bush is like all synth hits and the sound of the 80s and stuff. I don't know what the hell this is. This feels like music that I haven't been listening to this whole time manifest into this new artistic direction. I was amazed at how intimately they mixed the vocals. On some of the later tracks where she sings a cappella too, it feels like it's like inside your brain. Amazing. This is kind of what I was talking about with this conversational style, that there's really dramatic shifts in tone on some of these songs, but it feels extremely natural. Like, it doesn't feel like a shock. I feel like I'm contradicting myself here. It's like, how do I put this? You're disarmed, but you're not surprised. Like, you're just like, oh, geez. Like, again, all I can think of is this conversational dynamic where you're kind of bantering with someone and they're like, well, you know, actually it's been kind of rough for me lately. Like, I'm struggling with this and that. And just like, okay. Like, you kind of knew it was coming, I guess, but you you couldn't have been prepared for it. But yeah. But I will say though, on kind of the other side of it, on the track, you can kick me under the table all you want, but I won't stop talking. I was like, hell yeah. And the feeling of already within 3 tracks, I had a sense of her struggles. I had a sense that things haven't always been easy for her or anything like that. And to know someone like that and to be able to say hell yeah about them is such a wonderful feeling. I really hope that you have the sort of relationships with people that you know that are going through hard times and that someday you get to say hell yeah about them. It feels wonderful. And conversely, I feel like my life has progressed in a way that probably a lot of people would say hell yeah about me, and that's lovely too. So yeah, I don't know. There's moments where she really asserts herself, where she feels quite triumphant, and it's hell yeah. Drumming on this album in general is just super godly. I really want to go back and just have a purely rhythmic analysis of this album. The density of sound and the dynamicism, that it never rests, it never feels repetitive, there's never any like staling. It's always like a push to the next idea. It's always the feeling of everything introduced is growing and swelling. It feels like when there's a big transition, that it's more like, I don't know, like a whole new building of sound suddenly being constructed up Fortnite style around what you were hearing before. Or conversely, that same building imploding and all of those pieces falling down like rubble. It doesn't just feel like now this is happening, but that before you realized it, a whole lot of things were happening around you. It's really cool. I love the parts where she transcends words. She starts barking like a dog, kind of, or laughing, or it just things. I don't know. Those moments always hit really hard, and then of course later there's a moment that is definitely the hardest hitting of the whole album. But we'll get to that. Things expressed first in disarming platitudes, hitting deeper as Monomania reveals the true tragedies within. I think what I was thinking of here is specifically on this track, where what does she say? The evil is a sport when they pass the torch. Evil is, I don't remember the exact wording, but basically saying, the perpetuation of hate and violence and is like a relay race that you're passing the baton forward. You're passing that fire forward to the next person who will carry it and burn and pass it on to the next person. And she sings this kind of jauntily, like it's an actual expression or something, like something that you would sing a song in school to remember to calm down. But then as the track goes on, she repeats it, and it keeps re-emerging after other verses and kind of pushing its way through other discussions. It starts to have this sense of like monomania, such that you really begin to appreciate the true tragedy being conveyed and what was at first kind of this jaunty platitude. It's really, again, kind of this cycle of being disarmed through kind of this charming, happy, not even happy, but like active feeling, and then that same feeling's starting to become like manic. And you realize like, oh, there's much more to this going on. It reminded me of Fire Orchestra a lot, which I don't think it's really so much a specifically a Fire Orchestra thing. This is like a gigantic jazz orchestra out of Sweden, I believe. And they do like mostly session recordings with a lot of improvisation, especially on the vocals. There's a woman who sings on it who goes into lots of word transcendent phases, screaming and yelping on the tracks and stuff. It reminded me of that. Really, there's like a lot of music that's like that, but it really, for some reason, that strong connection in my mind. I love this. On track 6, I'm pretty sure they recorded a few things like on an organ or something, and then they played it back on a speaker, on like a boombox maybe, in the studio while they were recording the other instruments. I love shit like that. I don't know, just something about the fact that you hear the sound of those speakers, you hear what they're hearing during the actual recording, instead of like the studio magic of all the instruments somehow being recorded simultaneously. Instead, you have that appreciation of like time and preparedness and the feeling of that kind of being like a ghost almost, that it's just moving transcendently through the whole track without anyone's control. I just like, and then later I was like, wait a minute, no, there's two sets of speakers. I could identify them like distinctly in the sonic stage. I just love stuff like that. And again, it's like this feeling that I look for this in like weirdo primitive music, like naivist music, things where it's all about highlighting the imperfections of recording, all about capturing the feeling of like amateurishly making music on one take, or like some like zero takes somehow. I don't really know what I mean by that. But again, it's like she's arriving at this the long way around, where she wasn't setting out to make experimental music. It's just in order to like capture this emotional mode she's in, things start becoming very experimental. Some of the rhythms were like hella addictive. There was one that had, it was like a triple bum 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 that I couldn't stop like pounding out. It just had this awesome pulse to it. And you may have noticed that if you actually watch the listening part, I like, after that beat stopped, I wanted to like keep hitting it out where it would be as if it continued. Because I find that doing that, especially with these kind of like pulsing, pushing rhythms, reveals some very interesting things. Like you still see stuff that's like synced up to it, even though it's disappeared. It's really cool. Musicality emerging from chaos and noise, cool. I still prefer the opposite direction though. We got a little bit of both. I really like any track that feels like musicality slowly builds up from all these disparate chaotic elements. I like even better when something that has kind of clear-cut musicality at the start starts falling apart and decaying, like Robert Wyatt tracks, or there's a track by the Unicorns that suddenly came to mind called Azure Sky, Azure Sea, I think. Anyways, we got both directions, so that was great. Here I'd start trying to figure out like what the album is actually about in terms of like the lyrical meaning and stuff, which was overwhelming and really distressing, and I don't think I've even scraped it. At first I thought she talks about we were cursed since the moment he kissed us. This idea of love being kind of orthogonal to other feelings, that it's not something that emerges from like, it's not something that emerges from good times spent together and fondness. In fact, it's moving in an entirely different direction than that axis of fondness, and losing yourself in that love. She sings a lot about, I'm just trying to keep my light from going out. And I thought it was kind of a lament of like individuality that's lost in love, that when you become almost like secondary to someone else in your own mind due to this like limerent, overpowering love. Anyways, the album is about so much more than that. I started realizing like, oh, that's like, maybe it is about that too, but that's not the important part. She does this vibrato technique where, you know, normally when people try to sing vibrato, oh, they do kind of like an operatic thing. Oh, but she aims for like, she hits vibrato on like a descending thing. Like the phrasing is different than classical vibrato, where it's more like things like hit the ground and then like. I don't know. I don't think I can do it. Maybe if I was listening to it right now, I could try to replicate it. But like, it's really cool. It's super badass. I don't know how she does that. But yeah, trying to figure out the overall story. It felt like the role of the speaker changed a few times. Now I'm actually like not so sure about that. I think I just didn't understand what was going on at first. I think, okay, so here's what I think happens. She leaves a man who's been very abusive to her, who did some unspeakably heinous things to her. And as she's like kind of putting her life back together and thinking back to it, she actually meets in some capacity or is speaking to abstractly the woman that he's with now. And she's basically saying, we have this long lineage of women that have suffered at his hands. Like, what can I say to you to break this cycle? That's what I'm thinking. These are this multi-scoop melodies. Da, 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 da. Something like that. I don't know. That's not a good example. it's hard to be good at this, I assume. Talking about the heavy balloon, what did she say? Some of us keep a heavy balloon aloft to keep the devil away, or something like that. It reminded me of Sylvia Plath has this novel, The Bell Jar. This is, I guess, spoilers. The novel is semi-autobiographical, well, largely very autobiographical, but like veiled in fiction. And it ends happily insofar as the protagonist does not end up killing herself and is at least partially kind of recovered from her major depressive episode. But she says that the feeling of depression going away is like a bell jar rising up over top of her, and that even when she feels okay, she can see the bell jar over top of her that could at any time start to come back down. And I read that book in high school, and that image has really stuck with me. You know, personally, like my own experiences with depression and stuff, that feels really, really real. And I had the same sort of, I feel like it's the same sort of image, this idea of keeping a heavy balloon aloft that you're constantly struggling to keep this crushing heaviness off of your own head. Whoa, it's so good. The heaviness becomes obscured when it is most sonically educated? That can't be the word I meant to type. Sometimes when you're typing in Notepad++, it'll like suggest other words in the same document. I think I probably meant to put expressed. But sometimes I think I know which word is gonna buffer. So I start typing and then I like hit enter because I think I know what word it'll be. But I've actually made a typo. I don't know. Anyways, I think I meant to say expressed. So what I mean by this is like in the moments where the album is getting most intense and it's like really highlighting some heaviness or intensity or whatever, that's also when like kind of like lyrically the meaning of the song is most obscured. It's like overwhelmed in this tide of noise. Not that it's like you can't hear the lyrics, of course the mastering is such that the lyrics always come out, but the lyrics also seem to lose themselves into this energy and stop being, you know, this kind of conversational, let me tell you a story from my youth, but instead like just things being repeated or scattered imagery and stuff. Dude, I loved on, I think it was this song. No, I guess it must be not. No, it was Heavy Balloon, where she talks like, I spread like strawberries, I grow like peas, and I climb like peas and beans. Because that's how those plants grow. Strawberries will spread out widely, and then peas and beans, they have the spiraling tendrils when they grow, so they like latch on to other plants, or you can put trellises up for them, and then they weave their way upwards. So I don't know, it reminds me of Joanna Newsom, taking a look at the natural behavior of something and comparing that to human behavior. I just love that sort of stuff. I'm sure a lot more people than Joanna Newsom do it, but I'm a huge Joanna Newsom fangirl, so that's where my mind goes. Oh, and speaking of Joanna Newsom, fangirling stuff, desynced harmonies. I never realized how much I love this, where you have two harmonic lines, but one of them like slows down, or it starts later, or for whatever reason they just kind of fall out of sync. I think that shit is so cool when it's done properly, when it's kind of like embedded deep enough within the sound that it's not just like a gimmick or whatever. On Joanna Newsom's Only Skin, when she has the duet, deep into that 16-minute track, I realize now that is, I think, why I love that segment so much, is when the cold cover, Lord, nothing to chew on, and then the male line is like cold covered, Lord, nothing to chew on, and they like desync and resync throughout the ooh, it's so good. On the Cosmonaut track, right at the start, there's this sound of like a, and it kind of sounds like a rocket taking off or something, but it's not a sample, it's not a synth. I could tell that they were creating this acoustically, somehow I think through dragging things across string instruments. I was like, damn, that must have been a lot of work to get it to sound exactly like that. But she did it. Fantastic. And it made me think, in general, this album has like a very kaleidoscopic feeling. Things splitting fractally around you and swirling around. At one point, she refers to like a parallax view, which is where the scenery is like moving like in old video games, parallax scrolling. Like part of the scenery moves slowly and part of it moves more quickly, and it gives the sense of things having depth. It's like that. It feels like that you're swirling around a central point at different speeds. But most of this kind of kaleidoscopic music I think of is mostly studio born. It all has to do with mastering around tons and tons of different layered tracks and stuff. But here, at least I'm tricked into thinking this at least. There's either no trickery or extremely subtle trickery, such that it feels like they're actually just performing that way. That space is actually being critically, physically manifested. Not that I think music deserves praise for being like authentic, for being acoustic or anything like that in and of itself. It's just that that sort of sound is so novel and exciting to like really feel it being constructed in your mind. It's so cool. Oh God. And then near the end of this track for her, when she quite explicitly says what happened to her, again, it's like really this juxtaposition that what I thought was the point of this track is, it's like, oh, okay, it was much heavier than that all along. And then from there, what emerges is this huge wall of like angelic, overwhelming sound. And I kind of expected more of that throughout. When you're trying to think of like what would make an album really, really good to someone, usually you think of like really climactic moments of beauty, of just overwhelming, like head splitting beauty. But this album doesn't really have a whole lot of that. It's more about kind of going into like a manic jam type energy, which has that same sort of transcendental, memorable, climactic feeling. But it never just like aims for like, this is gonna be overwhelmingly beautiful sound until that moment. Until that moment. It's the only time where they go for like 2000% in that direction. And the way that they save it, the way that she saves both the revelation and this all-out sonic assault. That sounds negative, but you know what I mean. For that moment, for that ultimate climax, jeez. I feel like that's like the true climax of the album is at the end of this track. And this is something that I think is underappreciated in just any sequential medium construction, is like separating the end from the climax, such that the climax becomes more surprising, it becomes more impactful, because of that separation, which is like unintuitive, but it's difficult to explain. Somewhat strangely, I think one of the best resources for learning about this actual technique is in Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel Escher Bach, which is, I wouldn't say a super literary book in any sense. You know, it's much more just about the ideas and very self-indulgent about like puns and self-reference and all of this stuff. A great book, don't get me wrong, a fantastic book, but not what I thought would teach me about like a very powerful like literary technique, I guess. But in its typical self-referential, very self-indulgent way, it talks about this idea that a book should have like a fake out climax, or rather, sorry, a book should have like a fake out ending and then like a real climax that comes before the ending so that the reader doesn't see it coming. And it's like, oh, because of course they do that. Like they do the very thing a few chapters later. Anyways, it does explain in nice, clear terms what the appeal of doing something like this is. And I think it's done very, very well here, that this is actually like the climax of the album. And this is kind of like further rumination, and it gives a sense of like perpetuity, that Fiona Apple is just going to go on living her life. On I go, you know? But that the actual point of the album, if you could reduce it down to that, is found here. I really like all over this album, there's a sense that these conversational style of writing is like, it naturally builds up to just a heavy point. How do I? It's kind of like I can only kind of do it in like it's like da 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 da, you know. So da 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 da, right, right, da 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 da. Oh, so yeah, da 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 da, right? Like you establish all of the clauses, you establish all of the priors to agreeing with the reality of this final heavy point, but it takes you all the way there before you realize like what that all means. I think this is really good writing for drama. It makes me think of Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote a lot of dialogues and monologues like this, sometimes comedically, sometimes dramatically, but basically like again, all I can do is this like da 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 da, da 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 da. Oh, okay, da 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 da. Oh, da 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 da. Oh, do you know what I mean? On the last song, there is a very, very endearing moment where she's doing one of, all over the album, there's these really rhythmically precise speak sung verses, often in like harmony. And if you imagine kind of the studio sessions of this, that's like really, really difficult to do. Um, and the fact that she includes one where it breaks down and she goes like, ah, fuck it, where it looks like she kind of falls off rhythm and it feels like extremely real and very natural. It makes you realize like, holy, like this album has a lot of really difficult performance on it. Not in a way that's just kind of like smug or like, yeah, you got to think about how hard I worked, but a very endearing, natural, like, wow, you're just kind of in awe a little bit. Okay, those are the notes I made. I think it covers most of the little things I wanted to talk about. You can tell I loved it. I really did love it. And even though I feel like I still haven't grasped the meaning of a lot of these tracks, like lyrically, like what she's actually talking about, I'm very excited to keep listening to it, to dive back into those things, to study the lyrics, to arrive at those points. So thinking then about Pitchfork, I would say why this album gets a 10 is probably largely to do with that. Like everything on this album is fantastic. We can talk about the sonics of this album all day. Just really amazingly put together. And that alone would warrant like a 9, right? So what pushes it to that next level? I think it's a couple things. One is the experimentalness of it. It really does sound like nothing else I've ever heard. Even though it's by far not the most experimental music I've listened to, the emergence of this experimental aspects through clawing at the edges of musicality with your intense emotions, as I said before, feels quite unique. Feels like something that doesn't happen very often, or at least in this kind of style. That feels very special sonically, and I think that alone is enough to bump it up to like a 9.4, 9.5 maybe, on the merit of you've just never heard something like this before. And then in the kind of message of it, again, I don't know the details, and I'm sure the ways in which these details are interwoven throughout the tracks is extremely poetically admirable. But I feel like the overall tone of it is kind of like I've suffered. I've suffered at the hands of someone who is extremely cruel. Will never, I have such a complicated relationship with him. I'm going to be totally open and honest about it. I'm not going to try to paint myself as, you know, totally indefeatable, totally heroic, or whatever. I'll admit my weaknesses around him or whatever. How can I reach other people in the same situation? How can I form camaraderie with them such that they don't have to go what I went through? How do I make it clear that like I'm not ashamed of any part of my role in this. I'm not ashamed of anything that happened to me or anything that I did, and that you shouldn't either, and that we can have an open and honest dialogue about this. That seems to be the mission of this album, and I think that's a really beautiful, admirable mission, and that's the sort of thing that Pitchfork is going to bust out the tens for. to promote that, to show their support for that kind of mentality. That's my feeling. That's my feeling. That's why I think it got a 10. And I really, I'm excited to kind of discover that for myself. Probably I'll listen to it a few more times and read through the lyrics before I read the review, but I'm looking forward to reading the review too. I'm looking forward to reading other reviews, seeing what other people think of this. I mean, the Pitchfork 10 is about the most valuable review out there. It's the most powerful 10 there is, just because they're so judicious with it, and they're such a large, influential website. So I think that'll be, you know, the foundation of the conversation around this album is that it got a 10 from Pitchfork. For better or worse, that's what people are going to be talking about. So every other reviewer really has their work cut out for them. If they go along and give it a good review, they're going to have to work so hard to make it seem like they're not bandwagoning. If they give it a bad review, oh my gosh, they're going to have to work hard to try to deconstruct everything that's being praised about it from such lofty institutions. Oh, I don't know. I feel like I have a lot more to say, but I think it would be better to revisit this later and have kind of grown on it. But it's really good. That's the bottom line, is that it's really good, and y'all should listen to it. Whew. Okay, that's it for me. Goodbye.